In this video, I'm going to take a dive into the history books and check out all of the games we've seen in the Battlefield franchise. Some of you may have played them all, others might have just started with Battlefield 1, and throughout the next 10 to 15 minutes you will get to see exactly how the franchise progressed through different engines, time periods and gameplay mechanics in a vast array of locations, setting Battlefield up to be the gaming juggernaut that it is today. Battlefield 1942, September 2002. 1942 was huge. No other game did what Battlefield 1942 did, with 64 players on the same server, on foot, in vehicles. It was all-out war. The game was set on the Refractor 1 engine and was a PC exclusive with groundbreaking mechanics, setting the foundations for the Battlefield franchise in general. The game set the bar quite high, with gameplay ranging from flying aircraft, controlling submarines and driving tanks. Set in 1942, as you probably worked out, the game took place over the Pacific, European, North African and Eastern theatres of World War II, featuring 5 classes of infantry: Scout, Assault, Anti-Tank, Medic and Engineer. The game focuses around cooperative play, with teams aiming to hold control points rather than freely killing opponents. This game mode is of course known as Conquest. The game was praised for its brilliant multiplayer content and is viewed by many as a true Battlefield classic. However, many felt the single player was lacking. Remember, this was a time when people really loved single player even more than they do today, just because not everyone played online multiplayer gaming, and that is pretty much the norm in today's gaming world. 1942 made huge steps in the multiplayer universe, however, and that cannot be overlooked, as it brought so many features that have been repeated throughout games since then, especially in the Battlefield series. Conquest, classes, teamwork, huge battles, all-out warfare. Battlefield Vietnam 2004. Again on the Refractor 1 engine, Vietnam was released solely for PC users. The soundtrack was utterly brilliant and for many people will go down as the best in the series. As with Battlefield 1942, the highlight of the game comes from the multiplayer aspect, with players able to pilot a helicopter full of comrades over the lush Vietnamese jungle or fight on foot in a stunning environment. In many ways the game was fairly similar to 1942, however you had one major difference that I'd love to see return in some game mode during Battlefield 5's life cycle. Essentially, one team would get a certain set of tools and weapons to fight the war, whilst the other team would get something completely different, and it would of course be faction specific. This was really difficult to balance, and I know it would be very problematic in BF5, however if it was introduced it would certainly bring a far more immersive and authentic feel to the game, as you invested heavily in the faction you were fighting for. Interestingly, Battlefield Vietnam was the first Battlefield game to include a minimap. Battlefield 2 2005. Released on the Refractor 2 engine as a PC-only exclusive, Battlefield 2 showed players a multiplayer mode with teamwork at its core. The secret to the game's team play success is the 5 classes of infantry, each with well-balanced kits and speciality equipment such as medpacks or ammo packs. Again, you'll notice that in the more modern games, Battlefield 3, 4, 1 and of course Battlefield 5, although that will have some changes. The game focused on modern combat in a fictional war, adding new features that returned in later titles again and again. In Battlefield 2 you had squads, squad leaders and commanders, allowing teams to be far more tactical and push for a win with direct orders and teamwork. We take that sort of stuff for granted in the current crop of Battlefield games, and you can be sure most of it will return in BF5. However, at the time it must have been completely groundbreaking. You could also rank up with BF2 with in-depth stats, medals and ribbons. This really helped with the player retention, as players wanted to get that next set of objectives completed to unlock a medal or a ribbon, as you do in Battlefield 1. As a content creator, perhaps my favourite feature from BF2 was the battle recorder. Although I never used it at the time, I would love to see something similar return in future Battlefields. The game was highly rated and viewed as a huge success for the Battlefield series, paving the way for many other titles in the future. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. Developed on the Renderware engine and exclusively aimed at the console market, Battlefield 2 Modern Combat came out in 2005 and was the 4th installment in the Battlefield series. It was a console spin-off of the epic Battlefield 2 PC game and included both single and multiplayer. I don't know a huge amount about the game as I personally never played it, although looking at scores it seemed to do fairly well. being a console exclusive may have limited the game somewhat, as many of the Battlefield fanbase did sit on PC. Battlefield 2142 2006. The most futuristic game in the series so far, Battlefield 2142 takes place during an ice age with a war between the EU and the PAC, the Pan-Asian Coalition. In Battlefield 2142, most of the gameplay is found not in the Conquest mode, but in a new addition called Titan mode, in which missile silos have to be held long enough to fire at the enemy's Titan ship, eventually knocking out its shield. It's a fairly similar mode to Carrier Assault, although in a completely different setting, completely different environment too, but it's that sort of idea. You need to gain control of the enemy's stronghold. Once the shield is down on the enemy's Titan, you need to get inside and unleash complete destruction, aiming to blow up the enemy's Titan completely, which is a satisfying achievement right at the end of the game. However, the explosion is nothing compared to what you get in the current crop of Battlefield games. It would be interesting to see DICE return to a game set in the future, and I can see them doing that after the current World War II game is out of the way, although I think maybe they'll go to modern before they go to future. We'll have to wait and see. EA certainly have experience with games such as Titanfall, and mixing that with the features we are currently seeing in Battlefield, I think it could reignite some of that superb fun people were having in 2142, and for many people it was one of their favourite Battlefield games. Interestingly, both Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 hint at a 2142 sequel, with several Easter eggs and the Final Stand expansion links directly into the game, with early Titan prototypes being built on some parts of the maps. Battlefield Bad Company 2008. In Bad Company, DICE aimed to create a Battlefield game built more around a single-player storyline than previous games. Playing as Private Preston Marlowe, the game follows Bad Company, a group of rather unorthodox soldiers eventually abandoned by the US military control. Bad Company was the 6th installment in the Battlefield series and was highly anticipated due to the realistic destruction that was enabled by the new Frostbite engine. If you've ever played it, and it was the first Battlefield game you played, or the first game that you played on console, you would have been amazed. Only released on console, Bad Company was a huge success, with the humour of the campaign and the tactical destruction being leading factors. Blasting your way through buildings and walls with your comrades joking along proves a lot of fun. However, the humour comes at a cost, as many people believed that the game didn't really do a good job of being a true war simulation, which is something that the previous Battlefield games had often done. This was one of the issues many people had with the game. However, I still think it was great, and this was actually the first Battlefield game I played properly on console, and it hooked me into the franchise. I was a big fan of the single player. I played it quite a few times from beginning to end. Didn't play a whole load of the multiplayer, but the games I did play online were a lot of fun. Battlefield Heroes. I thought this one was worth a mention. It doesn't get a lot of talk on YouTube at all. Being the 7th installment in the franchise, Battlefield Heroes came out in 2009 and was produced on the Refractor 2 engine. Not on Frostbite, they went back to the older engine to produce this Fortnite-looking game. It was a PC-only exclusive and launched on a play-for-free service in a similar way to Fortnite. However, it didn't really have the sort of success that Fortnite has seen. It didn't get great scores, and the game did dip into that free-to-play market, which we haven't seen again since in Battlefield. Some say it was ahead of its time, some say that it really did tap into a market that required a free-to-play cartoony style game, but for me it didn't really do it, and it's not a game that I wanted to play or plan to go back and get footage for in the future. Battlefield 1943 2009. Battlefield 1943 came out in 2009 and was brought to us on the Frostbite 1.5 engine. As a console-only game, the PC crowd had to unfortunately wait until Bad Company 2 came out soon after, another game that could be enjoyed on console as well. 1943 was viewed as a revision of Battlefield 1942, not so much a sequel, and it did get some decent scores from critics. Destructibility was great in this game, and the online multiplayer was also pretty decent. It's not a game I know a whole lot about, but you did get the return of Wake Island, a Battlefield 1942 map that has featured in Battlefield 3 and could feature again in the future. Battlefield Bad Company 2 2010. Bad Company 2 focused on a new era of Cold War tension, threatening to plunge the world into war. Alongside your witty Bad Company chums, playing as Private Marlowe, it is your task to find a powerful secret Japanese weapon developed in World War II and stop it falling into the hands of the Russians. The campaign was superb and goes down as one of the franchise's best in my opinion. Alongside the single player, you of course had the multiplayer, with several new features making their way into a game that was loved and played by tons of Battlefield fanatics. Destruction was outstanding, and this opened the door for plenty of different playstyles on the PC platform. The console crowd had already got to experience this with the first Bad Company game, but now the PC players could get their hands on what was, in my opinion, one of the best Battlefield games ever to be created. It hasn't aged that well, with several features obviously missing and good servers being increasingly difficult to find. However, overall, I would say that Battlefield Bad Company 2 is a true classic. A great campaign and immersive multiplayer got people hooked, whilst the introduction of Rush and maps that had been purpose-built for the mode set a new standard for what was to come in the future. Following from Bad Company 2, we had a throwback to the Refractor 2 engine with Battlefield Play for Free, a PC-only exclusive that didn't receive a great reception and isn't really a game I know that much about at all. Let's move on to something a little bit more special. Battlefield 3 2011. Releasing at the end of October in 2011, Battlefield 3 was a huge challenger to the Call of Duty franchise, which of course back in the early 2010s was absolutely dominant in the FPS market. DICE brought the new Frostbite 2 engine along, so the game did look absolutely stunning, and in my opinion on PC was probably the best looking game at the time and still looks fantastic to date. If you go back and play it on 1440p maxed out graphics, it looks as good as the current Battlefield 1 game and will probably keep up with the next Battlefield game as well. It's absolutely stunning. Almost coming out too soon after Battlefield Bad Company 2 in my opinion, BF3 appeared in 2011 and is viewed by many as the Battlefield game. Frostbite 2 made the game look insanely good, with improvements in destruction, animations and effects. The entire thing is just a spectacle to behold. My bet is many of you watching this video started out with Battlefield 3, and so many people still actually play the game regularly, and you have to realise this game is 7 years old. It's been out for absolutely ages, with lots of other Battlefield games coming out in the meantime, yet people still go back and play it. New things brought to us with Battlefield 3 included Premium and Battlelog. These caused a stir when they were first introduced to the franchise, but have of course since been removed and amended. I remember the days when 90% of the Noshar servers had no shotguns written in the title, and of course the game had so many issues, namely the low hertz servers that caused you to die around corners all the time. But that overall feel of a true Battlefield game could not be beaten. If you have a few hours to spare, go back and replay Battlefield 3, as you'll find loads of servers ready to bring you what is in my opinion a true Battlefield experience. Battlefield 4 2013. My favourite game in the franchise and one I've played the most, Battlefield 4 is still played by thousands of people and remains the latest game in the franchise set in a modern to slightly futuristic setting. Battlefield 4 unfortunately launched like a bag of hot. However, DICE LA turned it around, creating an absolute masterpiece. New things that should be mentioned: Levolution, both for buildings and weather, and of course Frostbite 3. Frostbite 3 has been used for BF4, Hardline, BF1 and as far as I'm aware Battlefield 5. The game can be absolutely stunning to look at if you turn the settings up. Battlefield 4 is my favourite Battlefield game, probably will always be my favourite Battlefield game, and I absolutely love it. Battlefield Hardline 2015. A bit like Marmite, Hardline was a love it or hate it game. The gunplay was quite good, and if you didn't really care about the environment you were fighting in, Hardline wasn't too bad at all. New modes appeared like Hotwire, but wouldn't then reappear in future games, and all in all I think it was a bit of a spin-off, allowing the creative side of the dev team at Visceral Games to let off some steam whilst Battlefield fought at the main stage once DICE LA had fixed the multiple issues, hampering it at launch. You can let me know down in the comments what you thought of Hardline. I know it got a lot of hate at the time, but I think the older it has got and the more people know about the game, they realised it was actually quite a decent addition to the franchise. Battlefield 1 2016. BF1 dropped with the same sort of force as a nuclear bomb. DICE really turned things up with BF1, especially when looking at the hype surrounding the launch. The game proved to be highly successful, with millions and millions of people downloading the game ready to fight in a World War I setting, something that had rarely been attempted in a game before. I have to be honest, it wasn't really a game I fell in love with immediately, especially after playing the beta. However, with a bit of time I started to appreciate some of the more refined changes DICE had made, such as to the gunplay. I still prefer what we had in BF4, but it was nice to see DICE make positive moves to create a game that could be enjoyed by everyone. With no more Battlelog in BF1, you actually had a full application, and I think that will probably continue in all the future Battlefields too. In addition to this, you had the introduction of Operations and Frontlines, two modes that I think will stay with the franchise for a long time, and in my opinion are the two standout game modes in Battlefield 1. They work the best, and I think it's just great to see a World War I game with modes that really get you onto those front lines, as the name would suggest, fighting face to face with the enemy, and I hope they return prominently in Battlefield 5. Talking of Battlefield 5, this one hasn't come out yet, but will of course in October this year, 2018. Brought to us on Frostbite 3, set in World War II, it will release and hopefully be a good game. It will hopefully have a clean release, it will hopefully live up to the hype that we've got around E3. The trailer wasn't well received, but I think the rest of the stuff will be. DICE have already put themselves in a slightly more difficult position, of course, with that trailer, but I think it's going to be a game that continues and builds on what we've seen in Battlefield 1 whilst going back to the roots of some of the earlier games I've mentioned in this video. So that's it, a trip through time looking at all of the Battlefield games in the franchise. If you did enjoy, make sure you leave a like and a comment down below telling me what your favourite game was in the entire franchise. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.